Well, what's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with a preview for Week 17 of the NFL season. This is it, the finale. So we've got a lot of different things to talk about, including who's going to be resting players, playoff scenarios, all that good stuff. So let's hop right into it. But before we do, someone left a comment last week and asked for me to go back and review what results the players that I talked about last week did. Sure, I'm a big fan of holding everyone accountable, so happy to do this here. So I have the list of players that I just chatted on last week for a variety of reasons, and we're just going to go through and see what they did. So very quickly here, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we'll start with the tight ends that we talked about, and I'll go to Week 16. So we'll do Delaney, Walker, and Gronk were the two guys that we talked about, I believe, according to my notes here. Gronk, as usual, puts up 17.7 DraftKings points. I think he was the third ranked tight end. I'll pull that back in a second. And then Delaney Walker, he caught 3 of his 5 targets, but didn't really do much. So kind of whiffed on Walker. Now, since we are talking about this, I think it's worth noting, these are the players that I roster too. The players that I talk about are the ones that I'm most heavily invested in. So I'm going to win and lose with you here. If I remove these guys and just look at tight ends as a whole, here were the top tight ends last week. So it was Antonio Gates, Eric Ebron, and then we saw Rob Gronkowski at number 3, and Delaney Walker is not even on this list. I think I had about 75% Gronk and 25% Walker in my lineups. Wide receivers, we talked about Michael Thomas. We talked about, both Rams wide receivers, right? And, Robbie Anderson. Okay. So, did not have a great wide receiver. So my lineups did pretty good last week. Where I lost ground on the field was probably the wide receiver position. Because, again, I had a lot of Michael Thomas, who didn't find the end zone, only had 4 catches. Cooper Kupp did find the end zone. I actually did have a significant amount of him. He gets 3 times value, but Robbie Anderson and Robert Woods kind of fall down. Luckily, I was able to sprinkle in a handful of other guys, and I can show you the list of wide receivers here. Here we go. I had very little of Larry Fitzgerald, but I had a decent bit of Julio, so I got away with it in some winning lineups last week. But we kind of whiffed on, not whiffed, but we didn't do great on wide receivers. It gets better. Hang tight. And then let's go to running backs. Running backs, I talked about 3 guys. Alex Collins, who saw 18 carries, which if you would have told me he was going to see 18 carries, I would have been pretty stoked about it. He had about the worst game you could have for having 18 carries. And then we had Dion Lewis and Alvin Kamara. So I spent a lot of time talking about Dion Lewis last week with the Patriots. If you want to go back and watch it, the Patriots running back situation, it pans out. He goes absolutely nuts, rushes for 129, runs the ball in for a touchdown, catches one through the air. So 35.3 DraftKings points. If we, again, zoom out and just look at running backs as a whole, I mean, if you had Gurley, you had a 20-point head start on the field, and then Dion Lewis was the guy that I had the most of, dropped a 35 spot, so obviously very, very helpful there, and I'll get out of the way. You can see the rest of these guys here. And then at quarterback, this is where we kind of nailed it too. So the start of my lineups were all really, really good because I had a lot of Dion Lewis, and I had a lot of these guys. I had a ton of Kirk Cousins. Cousins is a guy we talked about last week against Denver. I had a decent bit of Blake Bortles, who we talked about, and we said Cam Newton was a pretty good GPP play. So those were the guys that we rostered last week. Cam Newton, 18 points. I think he was quarterback 7. Blake Bortles, 27 points. He was quarterback number 2. And Kirk Cousins was quarterback number 3, and he was the good value here, getting 4 times value, essentially, probably maybe even a little more there at $5,400. So I had a lot of lineups that started with Dion Lewis and Kirk Cousins. I had a lot of lineups that had Blake Bortles in them. So we nailed a couple of the two starting points at quarterback and wide receiver, and then didn't do great on wideouts. And we had Gronk, but we paid for him. So kind of up to you on how well you think that went. But I was pretty pleased with it, and I know I was able to cash in some 50-50s and a couple of GPP lineups, so I'm hoping you guys had the same success. Okay, week 17 in the NFL, a lot going on. So I'm going to show you the current NFL playoff picture because it's going to come into play a lot here. There's only, let's just take a look at it. Here it is. In the NFC, 5 playoff spots are already locked up. In the AFC, 4 are. So the bottom 2 in the AFC, Baltimore, Tennessee, they have not clinched yet. And then LA and Buffalo are the 2 teams that are still alive. Now, they need varying degrees of help, but they're still alive. On the NFC side, everybody's got it locked up except Atlanta. And then Seattle is the only team not in that can still get in. Of course, there's seeding implications here. I mean, New Orleans and Carolina and Atlanta, for that matter, all play in the same division, but New Orleans and Carolina are in the same division and have the same record. So, you want to win the division. These are things that we're going to take into consideration. You're going to have to pay attention to the news this week, okay? The report out of Pittsburgh was already Mike Tomlin is unsure whether he's going to start his regular guys this week or how long they're going to play. They're playing Cleveland. They can still get home field advantage, but they need to beat Cleveland, and they need New England to lose to the Jets. That's probably not going to happen. So if Pittsburgh gets out to a big first half lead, does Ben Roethlisberger sit down? Does Le'Veon Bell sit down? Like, Antonio Brown's already not playing, right? So, you don't want to take another catastrophic injury headed into the playoffs. So this is the type of stuff we're looking for. So it's not unrealistic to target teams that still have a lot to play for. I'm talking about these teams in the NFC here. Seattle, certainly. Baltimore, Tennessee, LA, Buffalo all have something to play for. And then any of these teams that have already announced what they're doing. So we'll talk about one right now. It's Matt Stafford. So we'll start with quarterbacks like we always do. Lions come out and say they're playing everybody. Now, whether you believe that or not is entirely up to you. But Matt Stafford, as of Tuesday, which is when I'm recording this, is going to play the entire game against the Green Bay Packers, apparently. Well, the Packers allow the third most fantasy points to opposing defenses. The last time that Stafford faced Green Bay, he scored 24.4 DraftKings points, which was his second best game of the season. That was week 9. So now he gets to go home indoors against that Green Bay defense that everyone is kind of torching, and he's had good success against them before, and it seems like he's going to play the whole game. So that is someone that I'm looking for to be, pretty interesting, right? Russell Wilson, we talk about him every single week. You know what he can do. It's not a great matchup, but it's not a terrible matchup. But again, they have so much to play for. It's going to be tough to roster Ben Roethlisberger unless we hear something. Like if we hear, okay, he's going to play the whole game, that's great. I mean, this can always change in the middle of the game, but I'd like a little bit more news before I roster some of these guys that have playoff spots already locked up. Jared Goff would be interesting, by the way. Let's just look at some hot quarterbacks here, and we'll just go back the last the last 4 or 5 weeks here. See if we can find anybody. Yeah, so here's Blake Bortles kind of playing outside his mind right now. The third highest scoring quarterback. Aaron Rodgers obviously not playing. He's back on IR. Brock Osweiler. Let's look at his game logs real quick. Because he's not going to play. 25 points against Indy, but what did I just read? Paxton Lynch is going to start that game this week against... Who is Denver playing? Kansas City. So that seems, last thing I read was Paxton Lynch is going to start that game. So that kind of leaves you with Bortles here as essentially, your highest scoring quarterback, right? He's playing well above his peers, which is pretty interesting. Anybody else here? Jameis Winston. Who does Winston get this week? Tampa Bay. We'll be playing New Orleans at home. Let's see what. That's a divisional game, so we'll see what Winston did against New Orleans the last time they played. Whoa, not good. Down here. So if you just go off past history, 3.4 DraftKings points for Winston. Now he only threw the ball 13 times. I don't remember that game off the top of my head, but he only threw it 13 times. Did he leave with an injury? Not really sure. That might have been the game he left. Because you can see every other game he throws it at least 30 times. So I don't know. I wouldn't be upset to buy low on that. He's played a lot better recently. Okay. That's quarterbacks. Let's go to running backs here for a second, and we'll pull the projections. And kind of a class of their own, right? Todd Gurley's definitely in a class of his own. Alvin Kamara leads the rest of the pack. And then you've just got a bunch of players that we need to decipher between. So how are we going to do this? So let's talk. All right, sorry, I had to pause there because I was confused on why I didn't see Le'Veon Bell. So this is a mistake on my end. Before I publish this video, I'll fix this. I didn't push my my stat update through, so this is why this is confused. But anyway, Le'Veon Bell, I have him projected at 22.1 DraftKings points, so just below Todd Gurley, so that you're aware. And then I'll push Zeke's through, which I think he was like 18.5, so kind of in the same frame here. So let's talk about this. LaShawn McCoy is someone that feels underpriced at 8,000. So let's just look at, say, last 10 to 16. Let's try that. Here's LaShawn McCoy, who is basically, what's that, running back 6. I'm going to pull up his game logs real quick, and I actually already had him up. So here is his game logs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games of 19 or more DraftKings points. If we sort it by week, you can see the last 3 weeks he's been excellent, scoring no less than 19 points in any of those games. And you can see his price was starting to come up. He broke 8,400. He then dropped down to 7,800, and now he's back at 8,000. Well, he's going to be facing this Miami defense again, right? Like, that's who they just faced 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Buffalo, Miami. And McCoy scored 25 DraftKings points, right? He found the end zone twice, both on the ground and through the air, and that's the kind of stuff that he does. So LaShawn McCoy, I just feel as if he's a bit underpriced there at $8,000. Here's that chart again. So let's just look at maybe like the last, here we go. Who else might be up here? That's interesting. Trying to find some more volatility. It's a pretty good pricing week. Kenyon Drake is still in there. If you're going to continue to buy, if you were buying on Todd Gurley already, I guess you have to continue to do so. Not too many outliers on this chart, is there? One guy that I do think is interesting, and I might not have his most up-to-date information because he just played last night, is Marshawn Lynch, who, yeah, I don't have last night's in here yet, just because I haven't updated the stats. But if you look at this, so I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I believe his suspension was week 8. I'd have to go back and confirm that, but I believe his suspension was week 8. So if we just do weeks 1 through 7, he was averaging 6.5 DraftKings points. Since then, he's averaging 16.3 DraftKings points. So basically, after he came back from that suspension, well, sorry, I'm still in the way. After he came back from that suspension, he's been really good. And then last night, I don't know off the top of my head how many DraftKings points he had, but I think he had something like 21 carries for 95 yards, which I believe is the most yardage any running back has given, or any running back has taken on the Philadelphia defense. I'd have to confirm that as well, but I don't think they've allowed a 100-yard rusher. They're like the best rush offense in the league, or defense in the league. So pretty impressive to see that, and it's almost been like since that suspension, he's been awesome. He's getting the touches, he's catching a few balls, and he's looking a lot better. So those of you who wrote him off early in the year, you may want to consider jumping back on. And he's going to get, the Chargers, which this is against running backs here. So the Chargers are like a bottom 15 team, but recently, like here's like the last half of the year, they're like a bottom 8 team. Okay, Bilal Powell dropped 23 on him. Kareem Hunt shredded them. McCoy, I mean, a lot of big scores up here. So, the last half of the year, they're a team that's trending downwards against Marshawn Lynch, who's trending upwards. So pretty good there. And then if you're looking for value, not sure. I can't believe Jordan Howard's $5,800. He's kind of just been mostly disappointing this year, outside of a couple outliers here. No real value jumping off the charts, right? Now, this is a week that things might open up later. So if we hear that, hey, the Steelers are going to rest Le'Veon Bell, like, okay, that opens up some opportunities, something like that. So keep your ears open for news and keep checking it out. It's going to be a very fluid week, and you should probably wait as long as possible to make your lineups this week. Yeah, I've got a bunch of zeros in here. This must be from my stat update, so my bad. I'll get this updated before this video goes live, so by the time you see this, it'll be fixed. But let's just talk about a few players that are still up here and in some good matchups. Let's go to wide receivers and I like to look at maybe the last half of the year. Yeah, here we go. I might be a glutton for punishment, but buying back in on Michael Thomas after the bit of a down week, right? So we talked about, go back and watch last week's video if you want to hear everything I like about him. But facing Tampa Bay, which I'll show you in a second, and then Julio Jones facing Carolina. Believe it or not, in the last half of the year, those are the two teams that have allowed the most DraftKings points to opposing wide receivers. So to go and be able to get two pretty big-time wide receivers, right? Like, obviously, Julio's elite. Michael Thomas is having a really good year in the two best matchups for teams that still need to play, right? Like, Atlanta still needs to play. And I guess New Orleans locked up, but they're playing for seeding. Like, yeah, that's about as good of a combo as you can get in Week 17. Guys that are playing well in the best matchups for teams that need to play. That's pretty good. Let's look at the last few weeks here and see if there's any more outliers. Here's the last 3 weeks. Tyreek Hill continues to pop off. Not a great matchup with Denver, but again, go back last week when we talked about Kirk Cousins against Denver. They're a team that has really benefited on paper in terms of fantasy points by weak quarterback matchups, which tend to lead to weak wide receiver matchups. So their numbers, I think, probably more than any other team, are a little bit influenced by that, a little bit skewed by just their matchups that they've had. So Tyreek Hill just running super hot right now. Not a great matchup on paper, but we saw that last week with Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins was just fine. And then Keelan Cole, I'm not sure, we might have talked about him a few weeks ago. He's under $6,000 this week, and I'll just give you a DraftKings here so you can see. The last 4 weeks, 13, 18, 34, and 19 DraftKings points, right? Just a very big beneficiary of all of those injuries to the Jacksonville wideouts, where basically everyone's on IR or everyone's out. And Keelan Cole has kind of emerged as, especially in the last 2 weeks, you're talking about 22 targets from Blake Bortles. Really impressive stuff. He's found the end zone three times in that stretch. So doing a lot of good things, and he's still under $6,000. And these are the types of players, not to get too narrative on you, because unfortunately Week 17 is kind of a big narrative. A lot of these guys are playing for jobs. right? Like Keelan Cole is going to go out there, and I don't know what his contract situation is, but he has an opportunity to like make some money this week, right? And just continue to play well. And there's going to be a lot of these players that are just dying to get on the field and take advantage of their opportunities. So again, it's a little bit of a narrative, which I usually do not like to get into. But this is the only week I'll really talk about it. And then while we're just here, I'll just flip to the tight ends, which we always know is just such a crapshoot of a position, right? So are you going to pay for Gronk? Are you going to pay for Kelsey? Let's look at some of the worst defenses recently. So Chicago getting shredded. That was basically just 2 games, though. Tennessee is a more consistent shredding. And the Jets. So Chicago, Tennessee, and the Jets, which would give us, let's see, Minnesota. So Kyle Rudolph could be interesting. The Jets, Gronk. Okay, so if you're going to pay up for Gronk, I guess you got to do that. And then, what was the last one? Chicago, Tennessee. Oh, and Jacksonville. So let's take a peek at some Jacksonville wide receivers. Or I'm sorry, tight ends. And here you go. It is pretty ugly. They have not had a tight end. Oh, I'm sorry. Scroll up a little bit. James O'Shaughnessy is the guy who you can see week 16, 14 DraftKings points. Week 15, they were bad. Week 13, they were bad. Okay, I thought he had a couple of better games than that, but he hasn't. Okay, the tight end situation in Jacksonville is pretty crappy. I'll be avoiding it altogether. But the other two give you pretty good options. So Kyle Rudolph, who we talk about all the time, and then Gronk. Let's see who else we can find here, because we always talk about those guys. Ricky Seals-Jones still pops up on here because there's a couple of big games and a small sample size. Let's see what else. Such a crappy position. Evan Ingram. Let's look at his player profile. Okay, so you could kind of buy low here, right? So he has 3 pretty good weeks in a row, or a stretch of, 5 out of 7. He had pretty good games, and then he drops and does absolutely nothing last week. Now, he is going to get who? Washington. Ooh. Washington's usually historically pretty sour at defending tight ends, right? But it looks like they've been better recently. But look at these names. Like, God, oops, that's actually not even Washington. Here we go. Yeah, there we go. They're like a bottom 8 team. There's just so many bad tight end names. It's unbelievable, right? You're either playing Kelsey, you're playing Gronk, you're playing Ingram, you're playing Kyle Rudolph. I don't know who else you could even go get. Actually, before I do that, sorry, one last thing. I want to see San Francisco and Kittle. So they always make a big deal about Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle, but that doesn't really always pan out fantasy-wise, right? Like, he had a touchdown last week, but feast or famine every single week. Very, very high-risk play. Okay, that's about it, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if there's anything else I can show you, if there's any other tools we can go through. Tweet me. It's at DFS On Demand. Or leave a comment below. Talk to you guys soon. Good luck.